I'm sure that a lot of players have been very disappointed with the recent Cavalry Commander release by looking at their skills and seeing what they might be able to do on the open field. And in today's video, I'm going to explain why this is the case. Why are these Cavalry Commanders, Hao Che being commanders like Belisarius Prime or Eleanor of, I'm not going to try to say the other part, why are they such very underwhelming commanders? I think that's the best way to put it, and it's really because cavalry are problematic, and it all stems from one issue that we will be discussing today. So if you're interested in why I think cavalry always seem to get the hard end of the stick whenever it comes to commanders, you need to stick around till the end of the video. Now let's just start off by instantly telling you guys what the problem with cavalry commanders is, and it is just their march speed. The fact that they're on a horse. That's really what makes them way too overpowered for their own good. I mean, compared to infantry, cavalry commanders are crazy quick. Infantry are 15 base march speed behind, and archers are 10 base march speed behind. That's a ridiculous amount to be behind the cavs. They're just way quicker, and obviously it makes sense. They're on a horse, they need to be fast. It just makes complete sense, but this is where the issues really start to come in, and it really comes in just simply the cavs are too strong. Whenever they release a good commander for cavalry, a commander that's crazy good on stats, that commander is too strong, and I think the best, real example is Nevsky. Nevsky was released in what we like to call the almost better version of commanders. It started off with Boudica Prime and also Scipio as well. These two commanders, I like to call them mythic tier commanders. When they released, there was pretty much no one in the game with a 2000 damage AoE, and there was no one dealing 2300 single target damage like Boudica can, and that's really where these mythic commanders came in, and Nevsky was a part of this tier. And when he released, he was the second strongest of them. People said Scipio Africanus was stronger. Now that time has gone on, we've actually seen not less Scipios, but we've actually seen more Nevskys. I think nowadays on the field, I see maybe 1.5, so 1.5 Nevskys for every Scipio that I see, and it's just because of how powerful Nevsky actually is. While Nevsky has no AoE, he has no shielding effects, he hasn't even got the most insane debuff. His debuff is good, but it's not insane compared to someone like Scipio with an AoE health debuff. Nevsky is still just an absolutely dominant commander. He's number one on a lot of players' investment list. He's a number one cav choice, you pick him before anyone else, and he's going on 3 years old now, and I think the real simple reason is he's just overpowered because of his march speed. Because of the march speed that cavalry commanders and cavalry troops have, they're very strong, and it just comes down to the fact they can get away from infantry. Infantry are meant to counter them, so a commander like Scipio Africanus is meant to be killing cavs. The second that a commander like Nevsky sees a Scipio Africanus, which they would probably trade negative against, they're just going to run away. I mean, it's really as simple as that, and it comes down to the fact that infantry, they really can't keep up with the cavs. No matter how much march speed you pump into the infantry, it's not going to make sense that if a man on their feet running with a sword is faster than a person on a horse, and it would ruin the realism. So we don't really see infantry faster than cavalry units. Of course, there are exceptions. I mean, Scipio with Alex is ridiculously fast, and it can catch cav commanders, but with most infantry marchers, something like a Gorgo Liuche, you're going to be noticing that they are not the fastest march. I mean, Gorgo has literally got no march speed, and I think Liuche might have a little bit, it's 20%, and considering that they're so far behind on the base stat there, they're not going to catch up with any cavalry, and the only way you can really damage a cav march as an infantry is if you outmaneuver them or if you're fighting in a murder bull. And then this also applies to archers. Any cavalry commander, and in this situation Nevsky, is just going to chase down archers, and especially since archers tend to actually be the slowest troop type, despite not literally being the slowest, we will notice that archers are going to get destroyed by cavalry. They just get absolutely annihilated. So we saw that once Nevsky released, anyone with a Boudica Prime, the second that Nevsky saw them, they would just gun for the march and they would kill it pretty much instantly, and this is still carried on till today. Most archer marchers are going to get destroyed by cavs, which obviously makes sense, but the problem stems from the fact that the cavs are too fast to really be checked by the infantry, so they've remained what I like to call unchecked, and still to this day really are. I mean, if you're running a Nevsky in a 1v1, he's going to lose. I mean, there's no doubt about that. He even loses to Zulang and Herman in a 1v1, but he's still one of the best trading marchers in the game with a Nevsky and a Joan, and it's simply because the march is so fast, nothing can kill it. I mean, you can't get a bad trade on a march that can't be hit. I think it's really that simple, and you're only really going to get a bad trade with a Nevsky if you mess up. If you walk in the enemy murderable, you'll get a bad trade, but that's it. But with a commander like Boudica or Scipio, or even commanders like Zulang and Herman, and even commanders like Liuche, you'll notice that they are going to get bad trades, even if you don't really mess up, just because they're going to be much harder countered by a lot of other troops and commanders, and they're usually a bit too slow to get away from the first skill cycle, so they're going to take that damage. Cavs usually can outrun that skill cycle. I mean, most Cavs I hit, especially commanders like Nevsky, are gone before I can even get near a skill cycle. I mean, they're just gone. Like, they're instantly back in their murder ball, and I'm not going to chase them in there, so I'll switch to an archer or an infantry march to deal that damage. So this is where the real balancing comes in of the cavalry, and it's because the commanders are so weak. And the question is, why are they so weak? And it's just because they may be weak in a 1v1 situation, but the Cavs are made to be a hit and run commander. I think it's as simple as that. Yes, the newest Cav may be able to beat a Zulang and a Herman in a 1v1 like Belisarius, but they're not made to be a commander that sits there and just keeps dealing skill cycles. They're meant to sit there, hit the opponent, and then just disappear back into the murder ball so they can get their best trades. And that's what most people are going to do with cavalry, and that's why they seem so underwhelming. I mean, Belisarius only has 2,400 damage factor, and Nevsky, who is like 2 years old now, has 2,300 damage factor, only 100 less. So you'll notice that commanders like Belisarius, and even commanders like Hao Bing, when they first released, were very underwhelming looking. I mean, a lot of people weren't very excited for Hao Bing, a lot of people were not excited for Belisarius, but I think once they come out, people are going to start investing in them, and they're going to see a massive spike when Belisarius releases especially. Even we saw with Hao Bing, no one really used him for the first 6, 7, 8 months. After that, he's pretty much everywhere you can see, and it's just because no matter what you release with cavalry, as long as they can do pretty decent damage and they can move around pretty quickly, so unless they don't basically reduce their own march speed, maybe Genghis Khan is a good example there, they're going to be a pretty much meta-dominant commander just because they're going to go out on the field, hit someone, and then disappear again. So I think that's where the nerfing almost comes in for cavalry. They have such a strong troop compared to infantry and compared to archers that they just get nerfed in terms of the commanders. The commanders are, well, we can just say relatively weak compared to that of the archers. I mean, archers received Herman Prime with their best debuff in the game, and AoE, pretty much everything you could almost ask for, and infantry received Liu Che, who's just a ridiculously overpowered commander. Don't even get me started on how strong he is, and then Cavs have been given Justinian and also Hao Bing in the same generation, and now they've been given Belisarius Prime. So obviously Cav mains are a bit upset, but they still manage to trade extremely well despite how weak they are relative to the other commanders. I mean, yes, they are strong commanders, but when you compare them, if you had a Herman Prime as a Cav commander, I think he would literally break the game, and it's just where that real nerfing comes in for the Cavs. Because they're so fast, they're going to receive weaker commanders, they're going to receive less AoE. We haven't seen many Cav AoE commanders. I mean, you've got Joan, you've got William, and you've got Zhang Yu. I mean, those are the only 3 AoE commanders to my knowledge. I mean, I think Jan Zisco might have some, but he's a garrison, so it doesn't count. So there's really only like 3 or so AoE commanders in the game for Cavs. But when you look at commanders for infantry and archers, there's a lot more AoE. They've got Zulang, Herman, Ashurbanipal, YSG, Nebu. They've also got commanders like Artemisia and even Thutmose. That's 7 commanders who have AoE. And infantry, same case. They've got a lot more AoE commanders. You've got Liu Che, you've got Guan Yu, you've got Leonidas, you've got also Scipio Africanus. I mean, there's already 4 or 5 commanders there who have AoE, not to mention a lot of infantry back in the day didn't even deal damage. So they've always been a little bit of a weaker troop type, and we've been noticing that recently they've been getting pumped with tons of AoE commanders to kind of make up for that. But cavalry haven't seen many AoE commanders, and they've always been a fairly strong troop type. So I think the reason this is the case, the reason we don't see AoE, the reason we don't see these overpowered commanders, stems about the fact that they are too fast and they're just too strong when you do give them an AoE commander, because a Nevsky Joan has stayed as absolute meta for so long, and if they put another AoE commander out for Cavs, they would just be too powerful. I mean, the only time we see new AoE for Cavs is once the other one kind of starts to fall off. I mean, William, yes, he's still a very strong commander, but he isn't as meta-dominant as he used to be, and then Zhang Yu came out, and then Zhang Yu has kind of fallen off, and then Joan came out. So the second the new AoE Cav commander comes out, it's meant to almost push the old one out of the meta to kind of keep the game a little bit balanced. And we've even seen with William, it didn't work because he's still a very strong commander, especially with the likes of Hao Bing. So Cav AoE commanders have always been ridiculously overpowered, and they've always had some sort of a nerf, like William's ridiculously rubbish shape. So I think that really with Cavs, we're not going to see an AoE till probably the next generation, which should be next year. And I think it almost makes sense because of how strong they really are. So now the final thing I would like to talk about is how would you solve this problem of cavalry units just being so quick? And it's really, really difficult to give a very straightforward answer. I mean, Lilith has tried multiple different ways that we can look at. First of all, when we look at infantry commanders, they've been making infantry gradually faster. I mean, it's to the point where infantry can outrun cavalry in some situations. I've seen Alex CPOs run faster than Nevsky Jones, and the guy had Justice. So it's crazy how fast infantry can be nowadays. But most of the meta infantry marches still aren't that ridiculous march speed. I mean, you've got Liu Che and CPO that can be pretty quick, and you've got Gorgo and Liu Che, but that is once again a bit of a slower march. So really, infantry are being given more march speed, there's no doubt about that. But if they make infantry too fast, then they'll have the same issue that they did with cavalry, and in the end it just ends up with a faster game and it ruins open field, I want to say continuity, which means it just ruins how the open field should feel if every single commander is running around at the speed of the flash. So I don't think that's really the best way to do it. Another way we've seen is Lilith giving way more commanders march speed reductions, and that's definitely a good way to do it. I mean, we've seen it with Hao Che Bing, and it kind of makes sense to give Cavs march speed reductions. It's almost like keeping themselves in check. And we've also seen commanders like Boudica Prime been given a march speed reduction. We know Liu Che also has an AoE march speed reduction. So we've seen a lot more march speed reductions over the past, I want to say, year or so, maybe even 2 years, which once again I think is to counter Cavs more than anything else. Of course, it's going to help you against infantry and archers, but when you drop a 40% march speed reduction into a cavalry march, they become the same speed as everyone else. And that's when you can really start dealing real damage to them and actually taking them out. Because you'll notice a commander like Boudica can almost get an extra skill cycle or two onto a Cav commander because she drops a 30% march speed reduction. And a commander like Liu Che can drop the same march reduction, actually a stronger one, and get another skill cycle or two into the Cav march just because of how helpful this really is. So I think march speed reductions are again a little bit of a better way to do this. But we can also see, and something again that also ruins open field continuity, because it's just a much slower open field at that point. You're walking very slow back to your murder ball, everyone's getting hit by AoE reductions, and that can also be a problem. There's no doubt about that. So really, when we look at this, there's now two options that we've looked at. We've made infantry faster, doesn't really work, it can work, but it does kind of ruin the open field, and we've been giving a lot of march speed reductions. That is actually a very good way to do it, and we'll notice that giving a lot of march speed reductions will help you slow down marches, especially like cavalry, but it has a downside of slowing down other infantry and archer marches who don't really need to be slowed down. And then the final solution that I could really think of to make cavalry a more balanced troop type really is give them weaker commanders, and I think that's the thing that Lilith has been going for, giving them commanders that are not at that extremely crazy meta destroying level like Liu Che and Herman Prime, who even though they are crazy good, are still checked. I mean, you can't outrun a Cav march as Herman, you're just going to get annihilated. And as a Liu Che, if an archer march hits you, you're destroyed. There's no coming back from it. So those troops and those commanders, while they do have very strong and meta changing commanders, they're still within check. And I think that if you gave a Cav main any of those crazy commanders, they'd just be ruining everything in the game. The commander would be way too dominant, they'd be way too overpowered, and it would just be goodbye to everyone else's marches. So Lilith has been releasing those intentionally weaker commanders to make them less open field dominant, to make it so they aren't as crazy on the open field, and to make it so there is a more balanced open field experience. And I think this is actually the best way to keep Cav mains within a reasonable power level and not send them somewhere insane, which would be almost impossible to repair. I mean, we've even seen it with Attila Takeda, who I think are the only commanders in the game to ever receive a direct nerf after they were released, because they were just ridiculously overpowered and they have no AoE, they haven't even got skill damage. So it's definitely a testament to say commanders without AoE can be strong, commanders without skill damage can also be strong, and just cavalry in general can be literally game breaking. I don't think there's any other commander in the game that's received a nerf besides these two, just because of how powerful they were. So overall, I think that giving cavalry weaker commanders actually makes sense. I think there's a reason Belisarius doesn't have AoE and isn't the most overpowered, and I think he's still going to be a ridiculously strong commander, despite him being quite underwhelming to look at. I think once he comes out, we're going to see a ton of Belisariuses. I reckon he's going to be destroying on the open field just because of how fast he is going to be, even though, I mean, this doesn't seem that interesting, the exiting combat stuff, it's going to allow him to get away from so many tough situations. So I think Belisarius, and I think that any new Cav commander released, even though whenever you look at them, you're going to be underwhelmed, they're still going to take a place in the meta, and they're still going to be a very formidable march. Now, if you enjoyed today's video and you found it interesting, I do want to ask you guys for a very small favor, and that is consider subscribing to the channel. I pretty much specialize on talking about commanders and equipment and ways to improve your account. So if you do find all that stuff interesting and valuable, trust me, my channel will be worth subscribing to, and it helps support me as a creator. Not to mention you can always unsubscribe later, so I do appreciate everyone who just subscribed, and a massive thank you to everybody who is already subscribed as well. The final thank you I will give out today is I thank you for watching the video, and I hope to see you in the next one.